Everybody, and welcome back to another Insider Guides industry webinar. I'm your host. My name is James Martin from Insider Guides, and here we are, number 14 of our industry webinars. We originally started these at the peak of lockdown back in February, March, and we've been sort of doing these every couple of weeks, and we're really proud and happy that the sector has come along with us on this ride, and we thank you very much for joining us today. All right, well, let's get into it. We've got a lot to cover over this hour, and I'm really excited about this one. This is a $40 billion sector, and it continues to be battered by this vortex of issues brought on by no international student arrivals. We have all been dreaming, hoping for some kind of sign that students will come back at some point. We know that if enrollments and commencements keep going the way they're going, next year will be pretty dire, and for the years after that. Just a quick stat in terms of arrivals. In the month of August, 40 international students arrived on a student visa and over 12,000 left. 40 came, 12,000 left. So what can we do? Well, the strongest indication of proof of life is in the form of a successful trial that proves to the community that it is possible, it is safe, and it is effective to bring students into an Australian city, quarantine effectively, and be a student on Australian soil. So after several reports in the media and a lot of planning, why haven't they happened yet? What needs to be in place for these to be effective? What does success look like in the long run, and how do we as a sector manage community expectations when walking this political tightrope? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by an incredible lineup of guests here today. And my old friend, Rob Lawrence, who's an incredible guest and an unbelievable co-host for the last 14. Thanks so much for joining us today, Rob. How's it all going in Melbourne?
Oh, hair's getting longer.
Good stuff. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this ride again. I'd like to introduce two of our guest speakers. The first of which is Sarah Todd. Sarah Todd commenced at Griffith in late 2013, having previously been at the University of Otago in New Zealand. I think I spelled that. Is it Otago or Otago? I can't remember.
Otago.
Otago. Yep. Thank you. Real-time grammar check. As well as leading Griffith's internationalization activities, Professor Todd is currently president of the Asia Pacific Association of International Education, an appointed member of the Queensland Government's International Education and Training Advisory Group, and a member of both the University Australia and Innovative Research Universities International Committees, as well as being on the boards of Study Gold Coast and the IEAA and the MS Square Media Advisory Board. She also serves as a member of the Association for the Commonwealth Universities, ACU International Steering Group. Thanks so much for joining us today, Sarah.
Pleasure, thanks for having me.
You're enjoying life up in sunny Brisbane?
Gold Coast, actually.
Gold Coast, oh yeah. Gosh. Oh,
Brisbane this evening, but Gold Coast now.
Yeah. Well, we have one more guest here, Craig Carracher, with over 10 years experience in student and social housing. Craig co-founded and is now the Group Executive Chairman of the Scape Group in Australia, a global accommodation platform with over 42,000 beds in planning, development or operation across the US, UK, Ireland and Australia. Craig is a director at the Australian Olympic Committee and its foundation and is president of Volleyball Australia. Craig previously was Group General Counsel for the Packer Family's Consolidated Press Holdings Group, managing partner at Minter Ellison Lawyers in Asia, special advisor to the chairman of the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, lecturer of securities markets law at University of Sydney, among other tutoring roles, and research director to the retired Honourable Chief Justice Murray Gleeson. Thanks so much for joining us today, Craig.
Thanks. Great to be here, James. Looking forward to it.
I'm really looking forward to this too. For everybody who hasn't been onto our webinars before, we have a Q&A box down the bottom. Please feel free to interact with us. We will try to get to your questions and we'll launch a poll as well. We're very keen to hear about this. Of course, this is a topic that it's a bit different to other webinars in that we would usually talk about something that's happened already and we're sort of reflecting on it. This is something that's still live, still going on. So there's maybe things we can't talk about and we just don't know the answer to. So just be patient. This is a discussion after all. For anyone who does teach international students or looks after them, we do run student webinars every week as well. So keep an eye out for that at insiderguides.com.au. Well, lots to get through. Rob, why don't you get us started?
Thank you, James. And Sarah and Craig, thank you for joining us today. It's very good of you to participate. And I guess I want to start off by just asking, really, we all desperately want to see international students returning here. There's no one watching this webinar who won't want that. And it's for me personally, it's been part of my lifeblood for 30 years. It's interesting, the comments from the Education Minister that it's worth $40 billion a sector. I would double that with respect. It's actually so many aligned sectors also benefit. So everyone is looking towards them returning. I guess the first question I'd have to ask, and it's a deep one, is trying to accelerate the return, albeit in small steps. Is this a case of less haste, more speed? Personally, I can see the arguments for and against. The logistics involved would be astronomical. The outcomes could go one of two ways. So, Craig, I have to ask you this. Why would you do this? What is the overall goal?
Get them back. First I'd like to say, Rob, James, congratulations on the webinar series. I've enjoyed nearly all of them when I can, and I hope when we come out of this wretched lockdown here in Melbourne, and the rest of Australia, we're motivated to continue to engage as an industry. The $40 billion, I know my group has invested nearly $5 billion in the last 3 years, and that's just in capital infrastructure that has nothing to do with the provision directly of the education service. That's in the ancillary service, which we call accommodation, but it's much more than that. It's an ecosystem, it's a lifestyle, it's the learning environment, it's where the students live for 15 to 16 hours a day. And right now they're living with us 24 hours a day. And there's 14,000 of them across Australia or capacity. Unfortunately, there's only 7,000 in our 14,000 bed portfolio at the moment in Australia. And that's very frustrating. And as much as I'd like to open up, and I have opened up 500 of those beds to the homeless in Brisbane, and I'd like to do the same here in Melbourne. And I know many of my colleagues in the purpose-built sector are wanting to do the same. We can't mix cohorts. So I will talk to you about timing and logistics though. Timing is everything, and whether we're hastily encouraging the return of students and putting things at risk or not, I think that's entirely wrong. And I also think it's entirely wrong to suggest that it's a logistical nightmare. It's actually very, very simple. And it's been made more complicated by the Victorian hotel quarantine solution. And it's also completely confused in the Australian media and the Australian market, as we no doubt will talk about the South Australian experience, because international students will not consume hotel beds. International students are not a cohort that are typically non-compliant. International students are coming here for a purpose, not returning here to get back onto their lives. So I think we talk about it being logistically difficult, but it isn't that hard, because 600,000 of them a year manage to get here and go home every year normally, and it's a pretty straightforward exercise. But there are some roadblocks, and I'm sure we'll talk about those over the next hour.
You've already put perspective in place for me, just in that one answer. So that's interesting. I guess the question I've got to ask both of you, though, is it will require a lot of inputs then. If it's logistically, I can see a point there. The inputs will come from multiple perspectives, and the activities and the associated responsibilities will be widespread. It's going to go across lots of different areas. So the logistics might be solvable, but it's how many players are in the game. So we've got the universities, the Study Adelaide, state government agents, accommodation, et cetera, et cetera. How would you envisage coordinating these, Craig? And Sarah, I'll get you to answer as well.
I might just throw, James, can you share a page, and then Sarah might be able to comment on this from the Griffith experience as well. This page is just a snapshot, but it gives you an idea of what's a relatively straightforward quarantine process at the end of the day. And we've had this process signed off by International SOS, who are world leaders in international medical repatriation processes. and they've given this the tick of approval on a commissioned basis. This has been shared with every university in Australia in the top 30 and also many others, as well as every state and federal government, and together with the comprehensive documentation suite that sits behind this. At the end of the day, it's very simple. PBSA is sitting there waiting to solve for quarantine solutions. From Unilodge to Tim Weston to Thomas Johansson to Glixton and Smith at Igloo, all good friends and all doing this and all quarantining students every day. We've already isolated 500 students in our buildings very successfully, and yet across all of our portfolio, not a single COVID case. So if you look at that page, you can see there's a simple quarantine solution. It looks like a lot of steps, but that's from, let's say, China or Singapore or India or Brazil, all the way into the university. So what are the big problems? And this is where Sarah can probably help us. Why aren't the universities more active? Why are the leaders of the academic space in our society, a typically very liberal community, being more public, more profound in their commentary about their desire to see the return of what is their economic driver in many respects? We're not hearing it. We're not seeing it. The big universities are extraordinarily silent. When everyone else is quite active, even the governments are endeavouring to get going, but it's all behind the scenes. But we need to now win in the war of public opinion, and that's going to require universities to step up, stand up, and be counted if they really want to take their moral place as leaders of society post 2020.
Sarah?
Well, I can only say, Craig, that many of us have been really, really active in this space, and I agree. The slide you put up, we have definitely in Queensland promoted PBSA as an option. We have developed significant plans. Every state and territory has approached this from a slightly different perspective. Now there is a national committee that's been set up, and I think probably belatedly, but it has the right federal government departments sitting around it and representatives of the states and territories. Unfortunately, I don't think it actually has any institutional or university representation on it, but some principles have been put forward. But then there's also the state guidelines that each of us have to meet. So in Queensland's case, Queensland universities have all been working together. We have developed a plan. The approach we were told to take in Queensland that it had to be industry-led. So we have done that. I personally have spoken with flight charters and accommodation providers, worked really closely with Queensland Police and Queensland Health, Study Queensland, Treasury, lots and lots of meetings, lots and lots of planning, lots of advocacy and lobbying with other state and local government representatives. Organisations like Study Gold Coast have been supportive. So there's lots and lots of work going on, as well as the advocacy in the local community. And definitely for Queensland, that was one area that we have to show we've done community consultation. We're very aware that the social licence for international education is pretty limited at the moment, actually. And unfortunately, international students are still seen as being somehow connected to the introduction of COVID-19 into Australia, even though there's actually no evidence to support that. So I agree that it doesn't need to be as complicated as what it is turning into. There's definitely an element of politics. There's an element of state border closures, which is being conflated. There's issues of capacity constraints around offshore Australians wanting to return to the country. And all of these things are being conflated, whereas I think every state and territory has, including Western Australia actually, has developed plans where universities have worked really closely together with organisations like yours, with some really innovative service offerings from a range of organisations associated with international education. There's been some great support services put together. Some states want to have everything done by the state departments. Others, like Queensland, we are required to contract and do everything ourselves, but with sign-off obviously from Queensland state government. So Lots and lots of activity, and incredibly frustrating that we are really no further ahead than what we were. I think, Rob, going back to your comment about haste, this isn't hasty. We've been working on it for a long time, and remembering that the first students that were impacted by COVID were, for many of us, a large number of mainland Chinese students, some of whom unfortunately just went home for Lunar New Year, and they left their lives here. And this isn't just about a sector that is worth a lot of money to the Australian economy. This is about students, many of whom who have invested many years in Australia, and literally went home for the weekend and have housing here, they have partners here, some of them have cats and dogs here, and they were affected, and now hundreds of thousands of other students whose lives are on hold.
I guess it's an interesting one. We just had a comment here from Anna Kirkham. Universities are not well positioned to be strident at the moment. We are lobbying behind the scenes, persistent but not in public view, because that is where we think will be most effective. I mean, I'm really curious about that, because I think for a long time the sector has sort of been underrepresented, considering our size and our, the amount of money we're bringing into the country. And it just sort of strikes me that, there will be some parts of the sector looking at us and thinking, how come we're not making more of a fuss about trying to get these things going? But with that in mind, I mean, I'm just curious about the plan that you put forward, that you're talking about there, Sarah. What does a plan look like in your mind? I mean, look, I understand that what Craig's sort of advocating, I guess, for PBSA to be a part of the mix. Do you view that as the key part or just one part?
In Queensland, actually, we were told that PBSA could not be part of the mix. As a group of institutions, though, we have advocated for PBSA to be included, and we have now had a couple of PBSA providers have had their properties inspected at our request. Unfortunately, no feedback on those inspections so far. Just referring to Anna's comment, I've done lots of radio interviews on this. There has been op-eds and various other interviews with Queensland Vice Chancellors and others, definitely in the state, local media and within Queensland, but there has also been pieces in other newspapers and things as well. But I also agree the decision makers in this case are political representatives and government ministers and so on. And so that has been a key focus for our lobbying and our advocacy.
Yeah, there seems to be a real issue. But there seems to be something holding it up. Rob, I think we might have to jump to community perceptions. Do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I can do. My perception's already changing as well. If I was standing in the middle, I'm starting to go, wow, this is not as challenging as it should be. I've got that view at the moment. So, and I can also read between the lines that all the risk factors would have been really carefully considered. I suppose I'm asking Craig this, but there's always the question about how the wider community responds. There's still a lot of ignorance, is the wrong word, but it's a lack of knowledge about the sector and what we contribute and what the industry contributes. And, there's always that comment which is, oh, they're giving special treatment to international students. You've got some kid in Mildura who can't get to Adelaide, but potentially a student from Singapore could, for example. You've got the student refugees who are currently stranded in Australia who can't get back. And dare I mention, if even one student tested positive, and I can see all the things in place to stop that happening, but what's the general feeling, do you think, across the wider community? How do you address that? How do you get the wider community on board with this? Craig?
Rob, it's pretty hard when the chief medical officers at a national level, including all of the chief medical and chief health officer of Queensland and the chief medical officers of each of the other states and territories got together in March, and they thought it was a wonderful idea to recommend to the National Cabinet that purpose-built student accommodation buildings should all be shut down almost instantly because they represent a significant threat to the welfare of the community. That would have thrown out onto the streets tens of thousands of students instantly with no accommodation solution, no funding solution, nowhere to go. And that was a recommendation, and it had to be actively politically fought against. And our industry, the purpose-built student accommodation and the student accommodation industry is nascent. 10 years ago when I began in this space, there was one building that actually Mr. Glixton and Mr. Smith put together and built in Brisbane and South Bank, the Urban Est building, which we've subsequently bought, and they've subsequently developed the Igloo portfolio. And that was the only building in the sector with the RMIT village that was in, which was the old Melbourne pub, which again raises some serious questions about what we all think students should be allowed to live in or should be expected to live in. And there's plenty of stories out there about how international students engage in society. We did a program yesterday on Channel 7 with the Sunrise program where we put the students in each of those weather things that they all do, and the students were put forward, and I think they represented themselves brilliantly. As we all know, we on this call, we're the converted. We're all talking to ourselves about how we should go forward. We all believe. So I can give you all the reasons why I think the community misunderstand international students. But when the Australian Federal Cabinet, with 7 ministers responsible for education or cities and education in our great gateway cities of Australia, where education is a cornerstone of the economy, if not the primary driver of the largest cities in Australia, when they don't know what's going on in the industry, we've got a serious issue. And I think we've got a major problem trying to get that through to the general community. But let me just say on this, coming back to the Queensland experience about the golden hotel solution that they've got, the gold standard, because they haven't got any quarantine cases. Hotels are wrong for students. Hotels are not the right solution. They're built for 1.6 day stays, not 2 week stays. They do not have the mental wellness solutions built into their service offering. The universities know it. Everyone on this call will know it, right? But we still think that this hotel solution is some sort of magical COVID place where if you go to a hotel, you either get it or you don't. And I reckon it's a 50-50 bet anyway. Hotels are simply accommodation providers. Students need more than that when they're coming from overseas. So I think we have to get away from this concept that hotels are satisfactory. And I'll circulate to everyone on this call, through Rob, an analysis of where we think hotels are inadequate and where student accommodation, purpose-based, purpose-delivered, is appropriate. Now, it's not just to fill my bedrooms, it's to provide a wellness solution and to avoid the risk of there being a positive case. But every day, there are positive cases from Australians returning from overseas. Let's be honest, that's what brought COVID in here, right? That created the security disaster of Victoria, because positive COVID at Australians to come back, quite frankly, many of them, so they can get treated here. And I wouldn't blame them from where they were coming from versus being here in our great medical institutions, right? But that is the reality. And there will be students that come here with COVID. There will be. But that should be no surprise to anyone. This is a global problem. We're trying to live with it and manage through it. I, again, don't think it's a difficult process. I think the community will be on board. And I think we're constantly so scared that we're planning for failure. Now, I heard Sarah say how much planning has been going on. There has been. And I know Griffith have actually been at the forefront, and a number of the Queensland universities have been at the forefront. All of them are working very hard, but we're planning for failure. Let's just switch our thought process and plan for success. Students will be back here in 2021. We will be successful. Our governments will be successful. Everyone in the country is working for the same single outcome of success: to defeat the virus and to get back to some sort of new normal, which won't be that different, because we'll toggle around it like we've toggled around all the other great disasters in the world that impact on our societies. And then we will have a new normal. And we should be planning for that successful world. That should be our target. And that'll change the way we approach this problem, I think.
That's a great point. And I think that's I think what we're really battling is the community perception, and an ongoing community perception that we saw in the media this week that there were 23,000 Australians waiting to come home. So politically, it's not that easy to battle that. I mean, in the eyes of the Australian community, it's like, how can you prioritize international students over 23,000 stranded Aussies? It's not an easy, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's not an easy community perception to get over. Sarah, I wouldn't mind just asking you on that. I mean, just industry wide, how do you think the international education industry, if this trial was successful and students did come back, how do you think this would be viewed from other sectors such as tourism and things like that? knowing that there's a whole bunch of stranded Aussies out there as well.
Thanks, James. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems, actually. There's the state border closures internally. So, you know, it's a great headline. If you can't get from Sydney to Brisbane, why would you allow people to come from Shanghai to Brisbane? So, you know, that's a great conversation starter out in the local community. And then we have this issue of constraints on accommodation and quarantine accommodation. I think regardless of how many times we've said that institutions and students would be sharing the costs, there's still a perception that this is somehow an impost on the Australian taxpayer and stopping Australians coming back into the country. Actually, the PBSA solution is a good way around that, because we wouldn't be taking up hotel beds. They could be used for quarantine. And I agree totally with Craig, and we have made this point on a number of occasions that we are all very experienced at student support, and one of the things we've had to provide a lot of documentation on is around how we would engage with students and look after their mental health and well-being. And actually I think it's probably easier to do that working with PBSAs where they're already very experienced. They run student engagement programs. All of us this year have developed virtual engagement programs. We have established protocols and processes with accommodation partners. So actually it would make life much simpler, but that at the moment is a state-by-state decision as to what sort of accommodation is required. So going back to the tourism question, and obviously I live in a part of the world that is desperate to get tourists back into the country or even into the state. I think the difference is that international students are coming for a long time, and these students are very motivated to undertake a period of quarantine. And there's been countless surveys done around the world of current and prospective students, and they all understand that that would be part of the process in the short to medium term. They also are motivated to pay for that quarantine as well, and they see it as part of the cost of doing their qualification in Australia. I think for your average tourist who just wants to come and spend, a week at the Gold Coast or 10 days in Sydney, the idea that they're going to have to do 2 weeks quarantine is not really an option for those. So I think we can separate tourists from international students. But what I would hope is that if we can prove that there is a safe and secure and sustainable way that we can bring people into Australia and still protect the health and well-being of Australians, that if we can do that in international education, and I truly believe we can, then that actually sets up an option for then how would you extend that to conference delegates or tourists or backpackers or other people, working holiday visa people. How do we use what we would learn and that we as a sector have committed to doing? I would just like to reinforce that the students we're talking about, whether it's at state or federal level, there is agreement. These are returning students. So these are students who have been to Australia before. And so, working with them, but we need to be able to do that pilot so that we can then get commencing students coming in. And that's really critical. And that is what worries me, that if we don't get something going soon, time will run out for commencements for next year. And the tourism industry and others won't have our experience to leverage either.
Craig, I guess one of the things we've got to worry about is the messaging, and the way it's being communicated. We've seen divisiveness between the states. We know about internal borders. It's even things like the ring of steel and that type of stuff really worries me, because that message goes out overseas. We grew a sector that's seamless. We worked on the sense of the warmth and friendliness, and now we have words like ring of steel, closures, and everything like that. You got Paul Murray on Sky saying, Melbourne is experiencing Stockholm syndrome, and I can see that happening because I live here, as you're living here now at the moment. Do you think there's got to be more consultation in the community before, or do you think we just got to go straight ahead and just drive through, rather than being a helicopter? Let's become a lawnmower and just go straight through and get this underway and take the community on board somehow. Take people on the street on board.
I think. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think, Rob, we do need to get going, and real in-depth community consultation and education will take some time. Yeah. However, the reality is that these students will do quarantine for 2 weeks and then they will be in the local community. So if we don't have the local community on our side, then I'm concerned about the well-being of students post-quarantine. So we have all put in place, you know, what would we do? We'll case manage every student. That's what we've been asked to do by the Chief Health Officer. We would do that for every student after they come out, during and after they come out of their 2-week quarantine. But we also want our students to engage in the local community. We want them to engage across the institution with other students, with staff. And so it is really important that at the institutional level, at the city level, at the regional level, that everybody is welcoming these students. Otherwise, they're going to turn around and go home again fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I might just comment on that. I agree with Sarah, and I'm sure everyone on this call will agree with you too. That doesn't necessarily, I'm not sure we'd necessarily agree on the actions then. Rob, your question's loaded because you know that I won't get the lawnmower out, I'll get the ride on and I'll just drive straight through the hedge. So I'm not the best to politically advocate, and I have people working for me who are far wiser and far more conciliatory than I am to manage that for me. But what I will say is that we didn't plan the pandemic, but we've got it. We can't plan against the risk of a recalcitrant community member articulating their complaints about an international student. I know what Sarah's saying. We want this groundswell of community support. Australians, we are in such an awesome place. We have such incredible success in managing this pandemic. There are 85,000 positive cases yesterday in India, 85,000 positive cases. We're looking at less than 40 nationwide. And most of those, frankly, are in quarantine, and the tail of the second wave, and maybe the early footprints of the third wave, we don't know. But we're in a great place. The world knows that. International students know it. I'm more worried about the language that you're talking about, Rob, not of the ring of steel, but of the language with other countries, this nationalism that's redeveloping, that's the antithesis of everything an international student believes in. The mobility is everything. And Australia should be more welcoming. And sometimes Australia disappoints us all, I think, in the approach that we take. And sometimes that's most obvious in the engagement with international students and the migrant community. But I think we shouldn't be planning for solving those problems because they're deep-seated and deep-rooted. I think we just need to keep this simple. I think we need to get people back in the country. The worst thing that's happening right now is that universities are starved of the diversity and the opportunity that could be inherent in their offering. Right now, they're lucky that many students chose to stay. We've had in our buildings the greatest rebooker success rate in the last 2 weeks of any year in Urbanest, Atira or Scape across our portfolios, because students don't want to leave. They know if they go, they won't be able to get back, or they're not sure if they can get back. And so they want to stay. And so they're staying in their accommodation. They're happy in their accommodation. They're not happy with these circumstances. And frankly, the big challenge is for universities to open up more. I know in South Australia and Queensland, they are gradually opening up, and all universities are working hard on that. But we've got to put a lot of pressure on them from the outside to ensure that they understand that there is this urgency. And I don't think we should be waiting for all risks to be managed. Two quick other things. A pilot, forget the pilot, just get the students in. The pilot is the first plane. When the first plane lands, that's the pilot. If it gets messed up, we're in all sorts of trouble. So let's just make sure that that first plane gets in, let it go to South Australia or to the Northern Territory. And I've got to say, there's a message here about Warren Entsch, and I know him well because up in Cairns are doing some wonderful things. And the Queensland government is now enjoying almost a renaissance of enthusiasm for the nation to go to Cairns right now. We all want to go to Cairns, I can tell you. Every Victorian wants to go there. And Warren Entsch should be welcome and would welcome all the students there, and we could quarantine them there. I don't care where we quarantine them. The students don't care. They want to get here. They're here for a purpose, and they will engage in a productive, cooperative, compliant, supportive way. On the payments, Scape's even offered to pay for the charter flights. I'll pay for a charter flight today from anywhere in the world to bring 300 students in that are staying in my portfolio. And I'm pretty sure my colleagues will all put their hand up to do the same thing. And I think the universities will put their hand up and do the same thing. So I don't think the cost is the debilitating feature right here. No. It's only about the politics. It's about a Queensland election, the Northern Territory election we had 2 weeks ago, the WA election. It's about the Victorian Melbourne City Council elections. It's about the federal versus Victoria and Queensland issues. The politics, if there's a political will, this will happen. And we have to stop finding reasons for the politicians to say, oh, there's all these risks, we've got to wait, we've got to wait. The risks are no different to letting Australians back in the country, and we're a poorer society for not having these students here and not messaging to them. To Sarah's point, right now, messaging to them very clearly, you are welcome. We want you to come back. You are part of our community. You've been a part of our community, and we hope you will continue to want to be a part of our community. It's a simple message. And Dan Tehan has done a great job. Dan Tehan has been a great minister in this space, advocating for that privately and publicly, but he's in a cabinet that's got a lot of issues. It's hard for him to get heard, and we need to help him, support him, and play the reality of politics, which is this is a great place. The politicians ought to be supported. The Australian community will be welcoming when these students are here because they'll be underwriting the economies of our cities.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting point, and you know, for someone who works with international students every day, it does strike me that this question comes up as Sarah mentioned. These are the students that want to come back are students that have been here for several years, a couple of years, or they just want to get back to their lives. And I don't think they view themselves as international students as much as they view themselves as locals now. And so I guess what's really disappointing is how the media is sort of almost putting people into camps and saying, this is the preference for you guys first, then you guys, then you guys, then you guys. And then it creates this narrative in the community that there's this sort of waiting list, and that you can't jump the waiting list in order to get back in the country. When actually, you know, as you mentioned yesterday, Craig, you know, the school students are coming back under the radar. No one seems to mind. It's just they're small. It's a trickle. It's like 20 a month or 30 a month, but it's amazing.
And James, they should all be allowed back. They should be allowed, here. How unreasonable, how unfair, how inconsiderate. You know, these are the lives of the youngest of people who are in the middle of their high school and they can't get back to complete their courses. It's quite intolerable for those students, really.
But I guess my question here is for Sarah in regards to, you know, if this did happen in Queensland, how do you believe that the university staff and students would respond to this initiative if it was happening in Queensland today?
It's a good question. I would say, you know, speaking on behalf of my institution, I have had nothing but support from colleagues across the university, from current students who want to see their friends back on campus, and going to Craig's point about the diversity that the international students bring to our campuses. It's a feature of Griffith. We're all missing it. So I think, you know, I actually just this morning, I've had the Dean of Law emailing me again. She's in contact with some students in Canada. Canadian Bar Association does not recognise more than a certain percentage of the degree being studied online. If those law students don't get here very soon, then there are significant impacts in terms of the recognition of their qualification. Similarly, we've got medical and dental students that if they're not here, you can only do so much online. If they're not here for exams within the next few weeks, then, you know, that's 6-7 years of study, fairly intensive high-level study that we cannot replicate or offer them what they need to finish their degrees and have them professionally accredited. So this is really major impact. There's a personal impact, there's a career impact, there's an academic impact. And this uncertainty that students are living with all around the world. You know, we had, unfortunately, some who were here and chose to go home in March. And, you know, understandably, their parents probably thought they'd be, you know, safer, closer to home. They pulled them out and pulled them home. Now those same students are writing every day saying, how are you going to get me back? We've got commencing students who have started studying with us, actually right from English language right through to degree study, higher than expected numbers studying with us online. we're running lots of programs to keep them engaged, but basically they are students who didn't sign up to study online. There are different market students who want to study online. These are students who signed up and committed to an Australian and Griffith on-campus experience. So it's critical that we do everything that we can to support those students and recognise the impact that this is having on their lives, whether it's through, how do you throw away years of medicine and dentistry? And they're not courses that you say, look, you can pop back in next year sometime and finish that off. And,
Can't do that online. Yeah.
No, and education providers right through the sector have done incredible innovative work this year to get learning and teaching online, to get student support online, like phenomenal what's gone online in a very short period of time across the sector, because everybody's committed to seeing those students supported and able to continue as much as they possibly can. And getting them here is the next step and a critical step.
Yeah, Rob, what do you think?
I'll tell you what, I think the whole concept of well-being, I know, Craig, you already said the well-being and understanding it fully, and I know that's been part of your planning. The one thing that's really frustrating me, and to be honest with you, we started this conversation, I thought I'll take a neutral position. I'm now thinking, and I'll be really honest here, and I'm putting my head on the chopping block, I'd open up tomorrow with these students. I'm thinking, why aren't we bringing them in tomorrow? So, that's how I'm feeling from here.
I'd bring them in tonight, Rob.
Oh, yeah, but the short is, but what I'm worried about, and hearing your comments about external communities at universities and so on, they can see the benefit. I don't think it's the universities that are the problem.
No,
well.
No.
I think it's the puppeteers around them. It's, I was talking to, I won't say which university, but it's a regional university yesterday, and they were saying they want to bring them in. I think you can work it out. It's probably, there's only one that you referred to. But they want to bring them in, but it's the people around it, their ecosystem. Oh, no, can't do this, can't do that. They're the people who've got to get on board. And they just seem so narrow in their perspectives. And they're just thinking, oh, no, can't bring the risk. Anyway, that's a comment.
Well, it sounds like it just sounds like our audience here agrees with you. We did launch a poll. 81% believe this pilot program should go ahead. 84% believe that the international sector will respond positively. The one that is interesting is the community expectations. How will the community react in SA? Because that is the next one in line to do, it's meant to happen soon, a trial program. 40% believe that the community in South Australia will react fearfully, as opposed to 25% warmly. So there is a fear, and I think it's not unreasonable that there is a fear that the community won't react well to this. That is probably the most important barrier we have to go here. And I will jump now to the red flags and roadblocks. And I've got a question here for you, Craig. We've seen the state governments show a willingness to make this happen. As Simon Birmingham even came out on a federal level and essentially promoted it to the media as a done deal about a month ago, when it clearly isn't, as it's not happening. There appears to be something blocking it at a political level. It's hard to know exactly where. And there's been a lot of reporting of stranded Australians overseas this week, as we mentioned earlier. So politically, this does seem to be a bit of a political tightrope that they seem to be walking here. Craig, you've been advocating hard for this pilot program in Canberra, and it seems like, to be frank, what percentage chance do you give this of actually happening before Christmas?
Probably zero, frankly.
Really?
I'm actually not advocating for a pilot. I don't think there's no such thing. Sorry, student X, come on down to Australia. You'll be part of the guinea pig group. I think that's just stupidity. Honestly, what we're talking about is testing something, not piloting something. Can we get the students here? Yeah, you put them on a plane, you test them, you put them on a plane, you quarantine them, and then they're like every other member of the Australian community, the ones that didn't leave or the ones that arrived back in, or the international expats that are returning, or the Australian residents that are returning. They're not pilot. That's not a pilot. That's just part of them. That person's coming back to live their life. And to call it a pilot is quite strange in my view. But nonetheless, I don't know whether or not that's going to happen. I don't think the South Australian example is a good one. I don't agree with you. I'd love to test the veracity of your results there, because how many South Australians answered that question that way? Ask the South Australians.
Yeah.
You go and ask Jeff Dennison. You go and ask University of Adelaide, University of South Australia. You ask the universities in and around regional South Australia. You ask the government down there. They all want it. They all want it. They put their hand up for it. I think Birmingham might have got him ahead of himself when he made the announcement, because I think the NT was lined up as well, but waiting for the election that was occurring the following week. So I think they do want it. I don't think they're scared at all. I think the answer to that question was probably most of us answering the question, do we think South Australians are scared? Because there's no other explanation for it not having gone ahead. So if it's logical, it should have gone ahead. If it's rational, it should have gone ahead. If everyone wants it to go ahead, why isn't it going ahead? Because people are scared, uncertain, and there's no moral center for them to make decisions in this uncertain world. It's so uncertain, people, unless there's some sort of personal ambition for them to deliver an outcome, people are going, let's not do it, right? And to me, that's where every one of the people on this call, I think you said there was about 400 odd people who were joining today. And if they haven't already switched off through boredom and the monotony of my monologues, then I'd encourage them to do two things today. And both of them are the same thing. Just find two different people to show goodwill to, advocacy support for the return of students today. Don't think it. Don't discuss it with your neighbour. Don't discuss it with the person sitting next to you. Do something about it. Write an email to your boss if you're in a university, right? Write to someone you know who you can contact today to advocate for the return of students. I frankly can't send more emails. I can't have more calls with chiefs of staff. I can't have my lobbyists do more than they're doing. Every university's doing the same. Everyone on this call has made an enormous effort. But now we have to show the government that there is a will. And short of going and getting the whole of Australia to fill in a form and a change.org survey of some description, we've just got to be sending positive messages wherever we can. It's hard for politicians to make decisions right now. They are not being rewarded by us for the positive decisions they're making. We have to back the cabinet. We have to back the ministers. We have to back Birmingham. We have to back Tian. We have to back Scott Morrison. We have to back even, and I find this harder to say, having come down here 3 days prior to the lockdown and 7 weeks later still being locked in. We have to back Daniel Andrews, right? We have to back Anastasia Pelagic. We have to back all of our politicians and tell them, now's the time for you to do something. And I think we've got 3 months, 3 clear months to advocate. Whatever planning universities need to do, go and do it. You got 3 months, 12 weeks, sort yourselves out, right?
That's done.
Because
Well and truly done.
Yeah, but you say that, but you're still finding risks. We're still finding reasons, right? So, and I know, and I got a call yesterday from the Queensland government and QPAS and QFES and everyone else saying, oh, we might consider PBSA, etc. We might let some students back in, but let's talk about it after the election. Well, that's the political will. So let's support our politicians. We can't change that world. We're not going to change the democratic system, and I'm a great believer in it. So what we need now is a bit of this apathetic group need to now stand up. And that's not the people on this call. That's the people we can influence. This call is probably the 417 people that can influence another 2,000 or 3,000 people that can possibly get things to happen. And we've got 3 months to get things to happen and to send positive messages to our international community, to our stakeholders. Yeah. Look, right? And then we've got 3 months to deliver the program.
Yeah. I see where you're coming from, and I think it's the sense of optimism and energy is, I think it's fantastic. I think, there was a poll in the Adelaide Advertiser. Phil Payne from Study Perth. Geez, you must be up early, Phil, joining this call. Well done. Craig, you mentioned there's 80% of respondents to the Adelaide Advertiser survey said no to the pilot plan. But, you know, I'd like to put that in
Of
perspective.
course they did, James. Of
Yeah,
course they did. They were being told, do you want your Australian residents to come in?
Of course.
And do you want people in Victoria to be able to come across the border to a funeral? And that's of course, the answer to that is going to be no. It was dumb timing, dumb timing. But that's actually not the question. To Sarah's point, these are parallel processes. Letting in international students is not to jump the queue. It really isn't. And the great thing about that is the conversation has finally begun. We're underway now. So let's keep that conversation going, right? Let's have that with people. Let's ask them, when can we do this? And that's why I'm saying 3 months of the planning, so-called, let them gesticulate them for 3 months. And then hopefully we come out the other side, and 3 months after, we've got a plan to be able to execute, and we've got 2021 and it's all happening. And that is going to be the community expectation, I think.
Yeah, interesting. All right, Rob, you got a question for Sarah?
Yeah, but I'm going to change it. I'm going to put you on without notice, Sarah. Yesterday we had a brief conversation, and listening to Craig now. I don't think sometimes we help ourselves. There was a paper we discussed yesterday that got widely circulated. It's being encouraged to be distributed, all about the negativity of what's impacting. And I was absolutely enraged when I got it, and it takes a lot to get me upset. Have you got a fit? You know, this paper, just for everyone to know, is all about the negativity, about the hardships, about all those things. What do you think, Sarah, about things like that paper?
I don't think it does us any favours. It fails to recognise the difference between temporary migrants to Australia and students. Students are enrolled in studying and supported by institutions. Of course, we could always all do more, and there will always be hardship cases, unfortunately, that the media or somebody else will pick up on. But the reality is, I think the sector, in response to limited support from other areas, has gone above and beyond this year, and there are plenty of cases of students who are here and well supported. You know, we've put flexible payment plans, we've put pragmatic food hampers. All of us, and I'm sure many people on this call, have been involved in many of those things. We've worked with accommodation providers around crisis accommodation. There's a really positive story to tell. So much more positive would have been if we didn't have to deal with this at all. But the reality is we are dealing with it, and we've responded, I think, incredibly well across Australia, and it's a great story. And so the release of that report yesterday, even in light of this discussion around pilots, again, it suggests to the community that these students are going to come in and somehow be a burden. They're going to be a burden on institutions. They're going to be a burden on the community, because it's international students are suffering hardship is one headline. Universities, TAFE, schools, everyone wants to bring more students in is another headline. And unfortunately, if you start looking at the two and you're just the average person in the community, it's hard to disentangle those two stories. So the timing, it's, you know, there's a few issues with that report anyway, but the timing is not helpful. On Craig's point, I don't think we've got 3 months. If we don't get, and I agree, I prefer it not to be called a pilot. The reality is that's what it's being called. And, you know, definitely in Queensland, we actually are supposed to be doing a 3-month pilot and then a formal evaluation, not at our request. If we don't get students coming in here very, very soon, we are going to have significant issues with retaining the students we already have. You know, the UK is looking at a January intake for international students. Canada, other countries are welcoming students who have started studying with us, and we definitely won't be recruiting and commencing new students into the education sector in Australia next year if we can't go out with some certainty, say this is what's happening, this is what the process will look like, and this is when you'll be coming into Australia.
Yeah, and Sarah, I'm just going to add something else onto that paper, because as I said, I was enraged. They included backpackers in the sample, and yet they referred to it as international students.
Yep. And it just unfortunately reinforces the confusion in people's minds about what an international student is, what they do when they're here. Unfortunately, we know there's workforce exploitation. We know there are students who suffer hardship. Regardless of COVID, those things, go on, and we have systems and support structures in place. We have, we check the finances of students coming into the country, and so to conflate them with backpackers and others who have not been able to work and not had that normal financial income that they would have relied on otherwise, and nor do they have a support structure around them to conflate the groups together is, I don't think it's done us any service internally within the country, and it definitely hasn't done us a service internationally.
I agree with you, totally. James?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of interesting questions coming through at the moment. We had one from Jonathan Pratt. Is it worth the sector investing in a targeted PR push to shift the dial on this? KPMG Pathways to Success shows the opportunity cost of not supporting a return of international students. The public needs reassurance, but the political language is headline grabbing and genuinely negative. Craig, what do you think about that?
We've got that was my first comment, that I think, and it was deliberately provocative, not necessarily, and that was that universities, well, we want the conversation to continue, and and we want the conversation to expand. And I think your questioner there is basically asking, where are the industry bodies to be able to prosecute this? Tourism bodies have done a fantastic job. I mean, Scott Morrison was the CEO of Tourism Australia, and what we're all surprised we're using hotels for quarantine. Julie Bishop's the Chancellor of ANU, and ANU was the first to be mentioned, the only university to be mentioned in Scott Morrison's announcement in support of potential return to pilot strategies. And then ACT disappeared off the face of the earth. We haven't heard from the ACT in some time. So I think all that's saying is that's normal, that's quite right, and that's quite proper, right? And our industry is relatively nascent on the accommodation side, because I think the universities have historically not done a great job when it comes to accommodation. I think the commercial sector now is not doing a great job in collapsing together to work together to form a cohesive unit to prosecute our arguments. But we're also less than 10 years old. Tourism bodies have been around for decades and decades and decades in their advocacy. We've got a long way to go. The universities, of course, have their own GOH and their relevant bodies, sometimes too big to prosecute, some are too small to prosecute. But our storytelling needs to get better. And I think what I'm excited about, and I know we're coming to a close and I don't want negativity in all of this, what I'm excited about is that in February, when I was prosecuting some arguments with ministers, and Dan Tehan actually saw us, and this is before education and everything else took off, and we managed to get some successes because really the community wasn't as cognizant of COVID until March, and we're already aware of it. Our programs kicked in on January the 25th. We had our coronavirus response task force at Scape was introduced, and we had a 14-day self-isolation requirement we imposed on January the 25th in all of our buildings, and I know others did the same thing. So we've been living with this for a little bit longer. But what we didn't get was, and what we can see now is Dan Tehan very motivated to support what we're trying to do. We've got an opportunity now, I think, to turn this a little bit on its head, to get the support and the network across this 417 people and everyone else who might be engaged in this process to engage together and to argue the cause. And this conversation needs to continue. Whether we do something in the media, whether we bring out the KPMG report, or I've commissioned personally the Deloitte Access Economics report with Chris Richardson, who's also arguing the same story, whether we present those or not, we act together, we keep the conversation going. Cabinet now knows the value of the education sector and its broader solutions right across every part of our political spectrum. At state level, they get it. At federal level, they get it. We're going to come out the other side of this so much better informed about the value of this sector. And it's not, James, going to be you, me, Sarah, Rob, and all the people on this call knowing how big this sector is. It's the rest of the community will know that. Your questioner wants to know whether we should spend the money on advertising campaigns. We are, but we don't have the industry bodies that are powerful enough yet. They haven't got the lobby groups they need to. We've got disparate groups across different subsectors of the education community. I think Phil Honeywood, by the way, I'd like to congratulate him and his advocacy in this space at IEAA, representing a lot of different stakeholders. I think Jeff Dennison's done a great job at SAA, and APSA have done a great job as well. So I think the conversation's underway. We should be very proud of the fact now that more people understand what we're doing, and we can really take from this point going forward, I think, a new frontier for the education sector and for how we can work with international students. We're being heard. we've just got to get a little bit louder, and then we've got to get our timing right for when people are prepared to listen, because they're just not prepared to listen now. That's the problem.
I'm somewhat confused about where this, in terms of actually making the next step, because it seems like the state government is ready to go. But then the federal government says, all right, we need you to increase. I'm talking about the logistics again, just because I really want to get to the bolts of why it's not happening right now. It seems like the federal government is saying to the states, you need to increase the number of beds that you can allow for international arrivals. So some states have said, all right, we'll do that a little bit. But I'm just curious as to whether or not it is just they're a bit scared, the states are a bit fearful of pushing the quarantine system too far, because there's huge amounts of resources to actually get this. You need the health departments, police, everyone working really, really well. I wonder if a state government did increase their international arrival caps by several thousand or more, like 10,000 each week, whether or not this would even be an issue, because there would be then capacity to do that. So I'm trying to work out whether or not it's the state governments who are saying, yes, we're keen to do a trial, but we're kind of a bit scared because if we push our resources too much, we may end up with a breach and have a Victorian situation on our hands. Sarah, what do you think about that in terms of I feel like there's something blocking it. Do you think it's fear?
I think there's a few things blocking it. I think Victoria was unfortunate all round, but the timing was really, really unfortunate for getting these corridors underway. And I think our plan was submitted in July, and there has been no formal feedback on it. And I think everybody's holding back. And then an inquiry was announced into Victorian quarantine. So there's been a general reluctance, is my experience. There's been a reluctance to look at anything different, whether that's for political reasons. There's definitely resourcing concerns. I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with Queensland Police and Queensland Health, and who will share responsibility and who will share the burden. Police are, in Queensland also busy policing border closures and things like that. So, you can see that those state bodies, even though in Queensland they're saying it's industry-led, ultimately it has to be signed off by the Chief Health Officer. The Queensland Premier has to take it to National Cabinet. Alongside that, you've got politics. The fewer cases you have, and we've seen this around the world, the fewer cases you have in your political jurisdiction, the more one or two cases gets highlighted. And, New Zealand's a great example of that. It sort of declared itself COVID-free effectively. As soon as there's one case, two cases, even if they're in managed quarantine, then that's a media feeding frenzy, political backlash you get about it. And so in Queensland, we've got down to pretty much no cases. One or two cases, regardless of where they come from, there will be a media frenzy about that again. And if we had 10,000 cases, people wouldn't be as concerned, ironically. You don't see the same concern in the States and other countries where they're dealing with far greater number of cases. But in a country and in a state that has done well at managing COVID, then there is the greater risk that seems to be associated with bringing in. And we do know that people coming into Australia, that there are COVID cases, and we would have to expect that some students will test positive. I don't see that as an issue. We've definitely worked on capacity of hospitals and all of that. How would they be, looked after? We've worked with OSHC providers on who'd be involved in that and where would responsibility sit. I think that's something as a country we're going to have to manage going forward anyway. If you or I or any of us are ever going to go anywhere again, we need to get to a realisation across the wider community that COVID is something we need to live with and we need to manage. And international students returning to Australia is part of that living.
It's part of it. Yeah, absolutely. Just a final comment from you, Sarah, before we close off.
Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. I think there has been so much investment in this, and I think, I'm always looking for silver linings in a year that has given few. I think the way the sector, accommodation providers, universities, TAFE schools, private providers, OSHC, everybody has rallied around. And to the point earlier about people recognising the value, we've got airports in Cairns, Gold Coast, Brisbane, everybody wanting to be involved in this and being supportive. So I think as a sector, we need to celebrate that, and we need to take that forward and use it to our advantage and to the country's advantage as well.
Craig?
Yeah, look, the 3 C's, I think COVID, capacity and confidence, everything that's happening at the moment that's restraining us from going forward is, I think, about capacity in our hospitals. So we had to flatten the curve. I think capacity in terms of border controls and resourcing and policing are consuming huge resources. So we're not going to make a lot of inroads until we've addressed that. I think capacity in the sense of arrival caps is all about control of capacity, again, of the hospitals, again, of our security services that are being stretched. And I think doing an amazing job, quite frankly, as well at the front line. And I don't think it's about finances. I think we've given up on the budget. I think it's only about physical capacity, and we're just underprepared. So I think for international students, and for the education sector, and for domestic students, and for interstate students, and fundamentally for our regional centres, for high school students, for vocational students, which represent a huge percentage of the international student cohort outside the university sector, I think we just simply need to plan for success, don't plan for the risk of failure. When the capacity constraints retreat, and we've got an opportunity to move forward, we need to move forward in a very confident way. And I honestly believe that if we start planning for success now, I agree, I don't want to wait 3 months. I didn't want to wait the last 3 months. I believe international students could be integrated into all states other than probably Victoria at the moment, but Victoria very soon, because I'd like to plan for success around Victoria as well. And that's what I know we will be doing. That's what the Scape group is doing. We've got a $26 million scholarship program over 3 years together with a number of universities providing accommodation solutions, because the big untold here is what's next. And that is the economic disaster that is out there waiting and looming, that's going to impact upon our students and their welfare and their ability to get jobs, and our own students' ability to get jobs, and fundamentally the need for education for them to be able to compete for those jobs is right there at its core. We've got some pretty big issues coming, but on this one, I think our timing needs to be right. But if we plan for success, if everyone is motivated, everyone wants it on this call, but we have to continue to resonate that storyline as a positive storyline about the positive impacts of the international community and their contribution to Australian society, and also our responsibility to them. It's not all about, oh yeah, but we can go without that, we don't have to take. It's about our responsibility to them. I think we'll get the message across, and we'll have a much brighter future. And I think the education sector has that to look forward to as its responsibility in 2021 and following.
Well, of course, we're not the only country in the world, and other countries have opened up their borders, like the UK. So maybe Rob, the next webinar, we'll try and get someone from the UK on and try to work out why they've been able to do it, and whether or not that's a good idea. That's a whole other discussion. But you know, we're looking at the Australian experiment, and other countries are doing their own experiments, some with more success than others. Rob, do you have any sort of final comments before we roll up?
Yeah, 3,500 cases, I think, in Britain yesterday. Yeah, I'm going to add one other word. I love the word capacity. I'm going to add appetite to that as well. What I've learned from today, there's a huge appetite. And I think we have to celebrate there are people with a great voice in this sector. We've got to celebrate those voices. Sarah, Craig, and I'd like to endorse as well Phil Honeywood's comments as well, Craig, because I think he's done an exemplary job at trying to unite the sector in very difficult circumstances. These are the voices, James, your voice, you know, it's other people's voices that are so important. We need to be out there. We need to prove the appetite. We need to prove the capacity, and we need to prove that we can actually manage this whole situation. Great discussion. Thank you, James.
Great, guys. All right. Well, look, sorry we couldn't get to all your questions or comments. There is a lot here, and a lot of familiar names from all around Australia and around the world. Some of them are really, you know, high-level people here that have joined us this morning, and we can't thank you enough for this. Hopefully, you've got something out of it, and you have, I guess, a vocabulary to discuss this in more detail. I can't thank you enough, Sarah and Craig and Rob. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time. And thanks again for joining Insider Guides webinars. See you later. Bye.